Former Justice Secretary Michael Gove has joined us. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
The scale of problems that we see like this, is it fair to hold your hands up and say this was a largely inherited problem?
I don't think it's a largely inherited problem, but I think we do have to be honest that there have been problems with the prison system for quite some time. The number of people who've been released by accident has peaked, or rather risen rapidly in the last year or so. I think the previous Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, recognised that there was a problem in our prison system that needed to be addressed by the targeted early release of some offenders. And I think while that's a fraught process, it was the right one. But inevitably, that's given rise to questions about how effectively the prison system can manage this operation. And as we've seen, we've moved from a system where 50 prisoners or so were released by mistake every year, every one of them, of course, an error, to one where it's now more than 250. And part of the challenge for David Lammy is he may be able to point to some of the difficulties he's inherited, but he's in charge now. And his management of the situation over the last 24, 36 hours doesn't really command the confidence that ideally we'd all like to see in the criminal justice system.
You say there that David Lammy's management doesn't command the confidence that you want to see. I just wondered if you could expand a bit more on that. Do you think that Shabana Mahmood had more of a grip on it than David Lammy then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I certainly think that Shabana Mahmood was an effective Justice Secretary who inherited a difficult situation. There is no criticism of her immediate predecessor, Alex Chalk, who worked very hard in order to try to bring to the attention of other ministers across government just how difficult the situation in the prison system was. But she showed political courage in recognising that we needed to have a targeted early release system. That's never easy, but I think it was justified in this case in order to say, look, we're clearing away some of the problems that we found on coming to office, and we will now fix things. And we're now 15, 16 months in, and there will be an expectation that the current Justice Secretary will be bearing down on the system in order to ensure that we don't have situations like this. And additionally, even when there are problems, and I think this is the particular difficulty that David Lammy faces, then acknowledge them. Early on in my time, when I was Education Secretary, I made a horrible mess of getting rid of a previous school building programme. The policy was right, and I had inherited a difficult situation from the previous government, but the presentation on my part was terrible. I then came back to the House of Commons to apologise, and it wasn't easy, but actually, I think in our political system, people will recognise if you're relatively new in a post and you say, look, I've screwed up, or I need to level with the House of Commons, then people will give you that opportunity to put things right.
I wanted to just quickly follow up on this, because there's been a debate about whether tech can solve this issue. If it is the case that this is still pen and paper to decide this prisoner's got to be released or not, firstly, that's mad in the day and age we live in. Secondly, that does suggest this is on the past government, because tech has been around for a long time.
Yes.
I mean, how is that possible that's still the case?
Well, that is just one aspect of the way in which our entire prison system needs fundamental reform and change, because the use of pen and paper, the use of fax machines,
fax machines, exactly. It's extraordinary.
Is an indication. It's also true, but to a lesser extent in our NHS as well. But in our prison system, what we've had is a situation where for too long now, we've been operating at very close to full capacity. And that means that sometimes if a prisoner is threatened in one jail, they have to be moved to another. It means that you've got lots of people in our prisons who are on remand. They've been charged with an offence, they may be dangerous, but they haven't yet been found guilty. And what we're doing is perpetually managing crisis rather than using prisons effectively to rehabilitate. And this is just one manifestation of that.
Were you frustrated when you were in government about this? Because
Yes.
you're a reformer, right? You know, we saw with education, you had spent a bit of time in justice and then you were kind of moved on, probably, I think it's fair to say, before you could really do any meaningful reform. I mean, you must have had your head in your hands.
Yes, and again, to be fair, George Osborne, when he was Chancellor in the period after the 2015 general election, allocated a significant amount of money for new prison building, and we had a prison reform programme.
Yeah, but you also stripped away loads of experienced prison officers, right, those years, which the prison officers I've spoken to say that that's had a huge impact.
There was a significant reduction in the very early years in the coalition in investment overall, but that investment was rising after 2015. George Osborne and David Cameron recognised there was a change. But then after I was evicted, and indeed George Osborne and David Cameron were evicted, there was a shift away from fundamental reform towards broadly crisis management for a couple of years. Then subsequently, particularly when Alex Chalk was Justice Secretary, there was a focus once more on reform, but by that stage, time was running out for the Conservatives. And that's why I think there is, there's an opportunity for David Lammy here. It may not seem like it when people are wondering why on earth he spent his Wednesday morning worrying about a new suit rather than worrying about released offenders, but there is an opportunity for him to say, the system does need fundamental reform and change, and part of that will be making sure that we concentrate on reforming what happens to offenders in jail, and part of that will mean, yes, accepting early release, but early release on terms that the system controls.
Michael, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Very good to see Lord Gove, the former Justice and Education Secretary, and many other significant roles in government.